So welcome to this week's episode of Leadership Soundbites with RokoM Michelle. And this week, we're going to talk about the power of observation. So I'm going to kick us off with a quote. There are tons of them. So just a heads up, when there are tons of them, this is like the extra special power of whatever the thing may be. So to acquire knowledge, one must study, but to acquire wisdom, one must observe. And so when I think about this, of course, Roko and I are process improvement, and, we've gone back to, the Ono circle, to where you stand there and you observe. And I think for me, what this comes down to is the difference between data and facts is that in order to truly understand what's going on, and it could be, what's really happening at the front line or what people really think, but to really understand what's happening, and I think that's the wisdom piece of it, we have to go to where things are happening and watch and observe and take it in, and don't go loaded with opinions or expectations of what you're going to find other than the truth. I'll stop there.
Yes. And so, when I think about leaders, and I think we talked about this offline, is observing is experiential, and you can go out there and you think you're observing it, you're watching things around you happening. But that's not the observation that we're talking about. The observation that we're talking about is using your senses to get an appreciation and have that curious mind as to what's actually happening to people. What does it sound like when you're there? Is it loud? Is it quiet? Are people yelling? Are people talking respectfully to each other? What are they saying to each other?
Mm-hmm.
What are you seeing? Are you seeing chaos? Are you seeing people run around? Are you seeing people in non-ergonomical, body positions? What are you actually seeing? What does it feel like? What's the experience if you have, we're in healthcare. So what's the experience from a patient's perspective, or what's the experience from that operator's perspective? So it's really using those senses to have an appreciation for what it's like to live in that space,
Mm-hmm.
that process.
So my brain went. So there's a couple things, right? So and I'm just going to be transparent about where my brain went just now, because what you described is me observing what's going on in the outside world. My brain went to me observing what I'm feeling, right? A different level of observation. And this is where it came from. So I am currently going through a hypnotherapy certification program. Okay. and part of that, it's interesting, when you're walking people through a time when, they felt empowered, confident, happy, joyful, whatever that may be, you're asking them to step back into it, right? And see what you saw. Mm-hmm. Hear what you heard, and feel what it felt like to be confident or to be powerful or to be happy, whatever that was. And that's where I went when I think about the observation part of it, and it hadn't dawned on me until you were talking, is that it's about us too. So how am I feeling in this moment, right? Observe that stuff and make those connections between what am I seeing, so and how am I reacting to it? Because I think about leaders, and granted, no title required, stepping into situations that maybe I get nervous, or maybe at the thought of going to talk to someone with a higher title than I may have, right? Is I think observe that and become aware of it in myself, and then figure out what shifts I can make to ground, calm, whatever that may be, or pull in a time where I was confident, I was self-assured, and feel and hear and see all that stuff, and then step into that. So I know that was a completely different place. It was, than where you were at.
But here's what I'll say is, I think what you said is important, and be careful of or be aware of those biases and judgments that you may have because of those experiences that you come with, right? So when I was taught around Ono circle, which is how to observe,
so explain a little bit more. Explain a little bit more about what it is.
So
I know I said it, but I didn't say.
Ono circle is going out to where the work is being done, but being quiet and observing the process that you're curious about, whether it's for improvement or just to learn how it is how it's performed. So, but you go out there with we teach it with big eyes, big ears, and
little mouth,
small mouth, because we want you to use the your senses and be neutral to what you're seeing and hearing, which is the bias piece, right? We're all human. We all have previous experiences, and we may think what we know is the truth in the situation, but until you actually go observe with that neutral mindset, you won't actually know if what your past history is true or not, or what the actual situation is.
Yeah, to your point. Otherwise, you could end up just zeroing in on what you expect to find.
That's right.
And miss the other stuff because you're not. Exactly. I have another quote, and I'm going to have to read it over here because it syncs to all that stuff. The ability to observe without evaluating is the highest form of intelligence. So for me, it's about that. Don't form opinions about stuff, or don't. I challenge us to not make connections to stuff that may not be connected.
Just capture what you're seeing and hearing.
Yeah. The facts. No, I totally agree with that.
The other thing, Michelle, is, for leaders, again, I know we talked about this offline. It's not something that you would just say, go and observe, right? Yeah. We really have to teach people how to see. So think of opportunities where you can go out with somebody and observe something and compare your notes, just to help develop that person's neutrality, or observing without judgment, so that they have some basis for learning around how to observe using their senses and not past experiences.
Yes. And the other thing that comes to mind for me is if you think about leadership and where there is power in observation is, and I'm going to go back again to challenging your own assumptions, right? If you believe that this is how someone's doing something, or the work's being done, if you will, go put yourself in a position to observe, to confirm it, to validate it, to see what's really happening. Because I think what happens too on the front line, historically, leaders who didn't do the work created standard work for how to do the work. Then the front line would get the work. And this is traditional historical. If you're in a process improvement or a continuous improvement world, hopefully it's not how you're doing this, and then go understand, because what happens is you cascade down to front line. They'd look at this stuff and go, what the frick is this, right? We can't possibly do it this way. They never tell you they can't do it that way. They just change it because they're great at getting the work done. And so you have all these workarounds happening and you think everything's fine. So I think as a leader too, put yourself in a position to observe and really see what's happening in the place that you may have some responsibility. Or if you're frontline or somebody else and someone else is just kicking butt on what this process is, go hang out with them for a while. See how they're doing it. If they're getting different results and different outcomes that you are.
Oh my God, you just reminded me of one of my favorite stories of working in one of the healthcare settings. And there was an effort to improve our patient experience scores. And one of the areas that we were significantly low on was responsiveness. And also we had safety issues with falls. And the leadership team, in looking at data, said, well, they're falling because we're not responsive. You know, they were linking the two.
Yeah.
And so they were making the assumptions around the nursing units, just not ignoring the calls that the patients were making. And, you know, they tested, you know, they put some things in place to try and incentivize the nurses to answer the calls faster. And of course, it didn't move the needle. And then we were asked to come in and we said, great, let's go out and observe. And we went out with the manager, and the manager was, you know, watching with one of the coaches, and what they saw was entirely different.
Yeah.
So first they said, okay, well, what time of day does our falls typically happen the most? And so they were looking, and so they showed up at that time. And what they saw was nurses were giving Lasix to their patients at lunchtime. But it was also the shift change. So they would deliver lunches and the medications, and then they would come back and they would change shifts. So during that change of shift, patients were falling because the Lasix had kicked in and they needed to go to the bathroom. But it was the one time, you know, the part of the day when nurses weren't readily available because they were changing shifts. And so simply by changing the time that they give the Lasix to that patient population, they immediately reduced a significant amount of their patient falls, and obviously increased the responsiveness because they were more available when the patients needed to go. So that would have only happened through observation, because you wouldn't have got it through the data.
No, because, and you can incentivize all day long, but if they don't change the process, right, the timing of all that stuff, which is where the broken stuff was happening, it wouldn't matter.
Right.
And so nurses would be frustrated because it's like, okay, I'm responding as quickly as I can, but during shift change, when we're doing handoffs, you know, on the care for all the patients I'm responsible for, I can't be there. And floats aren't going to be able to handle, the float RNs are not going to be able to handle it as well as the regular care team. Yeah, it's interesting. So there's a lot of power in that. I mean, as number of quotes that there were, this is a powerful power, right, of observation. So I've appreciated this time. What's one or two things that you want people to walk away with?
I think I'll go back to the quote that you started with. Through observation, there is wisdom. True knowledge and experience comes from going out, seeing and hearing what's actually happening. There's just, you can gain so much insight and appreciation.
So here's where my brain just went when you were talking about that, is that we're comfortable with going out and observing. And it took me back to the first time that I went and observed, right? And I'm going to say, at a healthcare setting, I have a finance background, right? Back in the day with healthcare. And so when I stepped into the role as a lean consultant for the first time, thank goodness I was partnered. Jamie Aston met her, right? She and I were partners. So she's a nurse. And we're going to go observe on this medical unit, or maybe it was L&D, one of them. And I was scared to death. Okay. Which, if you haven't done observations and it's not your place of work, I mean, it's not your people, your team, your department, it can be daunting. And I don't care what level of leadership you are. And I think the further you get away from the work, the more challenging it is. So what I'll say is, when I went in there, she's like, Michelle, it's no big deal. So just go introduce yourself, explain to people why you're there. I just want to learn. Right, through observing. I just want to learn what you're doing, what you're up against, the barriers that you may face, right? And I just want to watch. Let people know why you're there, and be comfortable with being uncomfortable. It does get easier with time, but it is harder the further you are removed from the front line, especially if that's not your department, just to go, I'm going to go observe, you know. It is scary and daunting at first, but do it and be comfortable with the uncomfortable. So
Mhm.
that's what came to mind for me. Had nothing to do with hypnotherapy.
Nothing.
So yeah, just true little squirrels that we're chasing. So I appreciate this time, and I look forward to next time always. So this has been Leadership Soundbites. Please like, share, subscribe, give us topics, comment, do whatever. Let us know if you want to be a guest. We're having fun with this. So anyway, till next time.